Hey guys, Prowl 1701 here, and today I'm going to talk about the Big Finish Audio Klein's story. Now this is just a little one-parter, about half an hour long, and it takes place right after part one of the Klein trilogy, which I listened to and reviewed recently, 1,000 Tiny Wings or something like that. And I'd started on what I thought was going to be the second one, Survival of the Fittest, and which I thought was going to be another 4-part story, but it's really 2 stories. You have Survival of the Fittest, which is basically a 3-part story, and then the first part is Klein's story. And it's basically picking up right after the end of the previous story, and the Doctor has asked Klein to travel with him, and as she enters the TARDIS for the first time, we get this wonderful nod to Doctor Who, where she looks at the inside of the TARDIS, and the inside of his TARDIS is different than the TARDIS she had done, kind of making me think maybe he switched it over to the TV look, or somehow it's a little different, or perhaps that was the one she had originally, because she's like, oh, it looks different, and he's like, I've redecorated, and she goes, I don't like it. So it was nice they had that little, you've redecorated, I don't like it, in there. That did give me a good chuckle. And then the Doctor basically asked her what her reality is like. Because, of course, this version of Klein is from an alternate future where Germany won World War II and Germany basically ruled the world. And so the story is basically told, cutting back and forth between her doing a flashback, basically. It's basically a flashback to her reality about her learning from the TARDIS and all of that, to her talking with the 7th Doctor. It kind of cuts back and forth. And it's quite interesting because it's really just expanding on events we had learned about in her first story, Colts, or Colditz, or however you say that. I'm never going to get that right. Her first story, of course, when the 7th Doctor and Ace ended up in 1944 during World War II. And so it expands on stuff we learned there. Basically, her being a scientist, her being recruited by this major that she also ends up getting involved in a relationship with, of her learning alien tech. And this, of course, is set in the alternate year, like 1961, 1962, I think 1962, up in there. And then she mentions one of the experiments she's working on, she thinks has time travel abilities. And the major that she's involved with mentions that actually they had ran into time travel before, that one of the aliens had come back in 1944. He basically explains to her the event that happened at Colts, with someone showing up named the Doctor with a companion named Ace, and that Ace had been executed, and that the Doctor had escaped. But a piece of tech had been left behind, and that piece of tech, which we know is Ace's CD player, actually I thought it was her Walkman, but it says CD player, the laser in it is what had altered history originally, and that the Germans had used the technology from that laser to develop the atomic bomb before the US did, and they had, of course, bombed New York and Moscow, causing the other powers, the Allies, to surrender. And that's how the Germans won World War II in this altered history. And that was interesting to hear how that played out. And he mentions this to Klein. And so Klein wants to see the TARDIS, of course, but she can't get into it. She doesn't have the key. And then she mentions he probably had the key on him. So she calls up to have access to the Doctor's corpse, because she mentions, oh, it's a shame he got away. It's a shame we could have gotten the machine. And then the major tells her, well, actually, we have the machine. She's like, what? And he goes, yes, apparently this Doctor returned in 1955 and was gunned down because some people, he materialized right by a sentry border, and they thought the Doctor was raising a gun at them. It turned out just to be his umbrella, so they shot him and killed him. And she's like, oh, so we have the TARDIS. But she can't get into the TARDIS. And when she goes to check, about the Doctor's corpse and his thing, she finds out, well, that's the funny thing. The corpse disappeared. We don't know what happened to it. We suspect grave robbers took it. Now, of course, as Who fans, as we're listening to this, you know, much like the TV movie, well, the Doctor's body just goes missing. You assume regeneration, which comes into play later. Right about this time, the Doctor gets a call from a mysterious person identifying himself as Johann Schmidt, and starts talking to her over the phone in a voice that is very obviously Paul McGann. I'm like, immediately I'm like, that's Paul McGann. Johann Schmidt, which of course is like the German version of John Smith. So it's not trying to be subtle here. It's not like some revelation. I mean, I guess if you're not as familiar with the show as like I am and a lot of other people are, I could see it. But for, you know, for us hardcore fans, it's not exactly, oh, it's like, oh, cool, I see what they're doing. So, of course, this Johann Schmidt basically talks to her, and McGann is great, by the way, in this. Talks to her, says, here's the key, take it. You know, I'm fascinated by temporal mechanics and all that kind of stuff, and if you need any help, let me know. And so, of course, once she goes into the TARDIS for the first time and realizes it's bigger on the inside, she might want some help. So she recruits Johann Schmidt to help her, and they work together for a while, which the Major doesn't like because he strikes me as the jealous type. And then at the end, they decide to make a test run because they can't figure out how to use the TARDIS. So they decide, well, we know the Doctor was in 1944. Let's go kidnap him and bring him forward to this time and get him to teach us how to do it. Johann Schmidt nudges her into thinking this. And so while the Major and Johann Schmidt get into an argument and a fight, which involves Johann Schmidt getting shot while they're fighting, she jumps into the TARDIS to go get the Doctor because she thinks this will be good for the Germans. She thinks she can make her major boyfriend possibly into the next ruling German. This, of course, sets up the events we see in Cults with her showing up there to get the Doctor. But the Johann Schmidt made one little slip where he tells her, quick, run to the TARDIS. And she's like, what? And he goes, the time machine. And it's only later she's like, he did say TARDIS. How did he know that? Because I'd never heard the word TARDIS until you mentioned it, pointing at the Doctor. And while the Doctor's like, it's probably your memory cheating. He actually says the memory cheats, which is a nice nod to JNT saying that. I don't know if they did that on purpose, but it's a nice callback to him saying the memory cheats. Because Seven does say that. And eventually he finally fesses up because you can tell it's nagging at her like, no, he said it. How did he know? And the Doctor explains to her about regeneration. He goes, to be honest, I'll tell you what happened. He goes, that corpse you saw never got stolen. And then she's like, no, he was dead. And the Doctor's like, no. It would stop a human, but a Time Lord. And he explains to her that, because she had just described Schmidt, because the Seven had already figured out what had happened when he probably heard the name Johann Schmidt and the fact that he had the key. He's like, what did he look like? She's like, tall, dark hair, you know, handsome in a gothic sort of way. And she's like, why? And he's like, just wondering. So when she's like, yeah, he got up a new man, she's like, what do you mean a new man? He probably looked different. And Seven tells her, he was probably tall, dark, handsome in a gothic kind of way. So Klein realizes that the Doctor can regenerate, change appearance, and that was him all along. She doesn't take it very well. Like, she kind of brushes over it after a minute, but you can tell she's kind of planning. Like, you just get this impression, come on, Seven, you're Machiavellian chess master Doctor here. Don't trust her too far yet. It's a neat little cliffhanger as it opens into the events of what I'm sure is going to be survival of the fittest. So, overall, I liked it. It's a good 30 minutes. It really does a good job, again, of fleshing out Klein's backstory and basically giving us a full version of the events that are briefly talked about in her first story. It's neat that we have Sylvester McCoy and Paul McGann in a story together, even though they never actually meet and interact, which is a key point of the story. So, and of course, McCoy is doing great as the 7th Doctor, and McGann is great as this alternate version of the 8th Doctor, this Johann Schmidt. I love the fact he's using that name. And the fact that the Doctor explains to her, I had to manipulate events basically to stop this alternate history from happening and to save Ace's life. because I couldn't come back and do it because of I can't cross my own timeline. I think he says time tracked in the story, which also explains why Johann Schmidt couldn't come back with her. He explains that to her right before they're interrupted by the Major. I can't go with you. You have to go yourself. And while she's trying to ask him why is when the Major interrupted. The performances are good. I like Tracy as Elizabeth Klein. The guy playing the Major is good. And it's really just those 4 people. It really is just a tiny cast, but they get so much done with it. It really doesn't even need a lot of background noise. It's very dialogue driven, but it's written very well. It's very good writing. The dialogue's very impressive. And all 4 of the voice actors are doing really good work with it. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Once I realized what was going on, because I was a little confused at first. I thought I was moving into a 4-part story. Once I realized that the Klein story is its own single thing leading into a 3-parter, I found that very, very enjoyable. It was a lot of fun. So yes, Elizabeth Klein and the Klein story. Have you listened to it? What do you think of it? What did you think of seeing this alternate take of the 8th Doctor and how he had to manipulate events? Comment down below. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button as well. I also have a link to my Patreon down there. All the other fun stuff down in the description. Links to the Amazon wish list. Links to the Amazon UK wish list. P.O. boxes down there. If there's anything you'd like to send me to look at and review. I want to give a shout out to Colin Coney, one of my top tier patrons. I appreciate his support as I do the support of all of my patrons and my YouTube members. It's very much appreciated. And most importantly, thank you for watching.